My friends, there is a story that echoes far beyond the walls where it was born. It is the story of a woman who walked into a room where she was not expected, where whispers filled the air, and where eyes asked a cruel question. Who invited her? She was black. She was underestimated. She was seen as an outsider in a world dominated by power, wealth, and privilege. And yet, what they did not know, what they could not see, was the strength, the resilience, and the brilliance she carried within her. When the billionaire family sneered, they believed they held the power. But in truth, the power had always been hers. With dignity, with clarity, and with courage, she made a decision that shook the foundation of their arrogance. She canceled their $5 billion deal. Now, let us pause here, not for the number, not for the money, but for what it means. This was not about wealth. This was about worth. It was about proving that no one, no matter how high their tower of privilege may rise, has the right to diminish another human being's dignity. Because the measure of power is not in what you own, but in who you are. And that lesson belongs not only to her, it belongs to all of us. Every day, ordinary people rise from quiet places and do extraordinary things. The nurse who works double shifts but still finds time to comfort the frightened child. The student who studies under a flickering street lamp because the light at home has gone out. The father who carries 2 jobs on his back but never lets his children feel poor in hope. The young woman who walks into a room where she is doubted and refuses to let their doubt define her. These are the heroes of perseverance. These are the architects of change. These are the reminders that greatness does not ask permission. It arrives, even when unwelcome, and it transforms everything. So I ask you tonight, where in your life are you being underestimated? Where are the voices saying, you don't belong here? And what will you do in that moment? Do not shrink. Do not surrender. Stand tall. Stand firm. Remember that the sneers of others are not prophecies of your future. They are reflections of their fear. Change begins when we choose courage over comfort, when we decide that dignity is non-negotiable, when we refuse to bow to those who tell us we are less. And let us never forget, true power is not in domination, but in determination. It is not in exclusion, but in inclusion. It is not in wealth, but in worth. So, to every person listening to me now, carry this truth in your heart. You are capable of more than you know. You are stronger than you imagine. And you are needed. Because the future is waiting, and it will not be built by the sneerers, but by the strivers. Together we rise. Together we endure. Together we create a tomorrow worthy of our children. And if ever the world dares to ask, who invited you? Stand tall, smile, and answer with courage, I invited myself and I belong here. There are moments in life when the world tries to tell you that you do not belong. It could be a glance, a whisper, or even a question asked loud enough for everyone to hear. For one woman, it was the moment she walked into a room of billionaires, a room dripping with wealth and power, a room where decisions shaped empires and fortunes. She entered with grace, but before she could even take her seat, the words cut through the air like a knife. Who invited her? That single question carried more than curiosity. It carried dismissal. It carried arrogance. It carried the centuries-old belief that some people are born to rule, while others are born to serve. And in that moment, every eye turned toward her, measuring her worth not by her brilliance, not by her experience, not by her vision, but by her appearance, her background, the color of her skin. Think about that for a moment. How many times have ordinary people like you and me, walked into rooms where we were not expected, not welcomed, not seen? Maybe it was a classroom where you were the first to dream bigger than anyone around you. Maybe it was a job interview where your resume was overlooked because of your name, your accent, or your history. Maybe it was at a table of family or friends when your dreams sounded too bold, too different, too impossible. The truth is, life has a way of sneering at those who dare to rise above expectations. And often, the sneer comes not from strangers, but from the very people who believe they hold the power to define you. That is what this woman faced. The sneer of wealth. The sneer of privilege. The sneer of people who thought that with all their billions, they had the authority to decide who belonged in their circle. But here is where the story takes its turn. She did not shrink back. She did not apologize for her presence. She did not allow their words to reduce her to silence. Instead, she stood firm in who she was, in what she represented, and in the value she carried within her. And when the time came, when they expected her to nod, to agree, to compromise, she made a decision so bold it shook them to their very core. She canceled their $5 billion deal. $5 billion erased with a stroke, not out of anger, but out of principle. She showed them that her dignity was not for sale, her worth was not negotiable, and her presence in that room was not a gift they had granted, but a right she had earned. This moment teaches us something powerful. It reminds us that the sneers of others are not a measure of our value. They are a mirror of their insecurity. When someone says, "Who invited you?" what they are really saying is, "I am afraid of the strength you bring, of the change you represent, of the truth you embody." And here's the deeper truth. Every great change in history began with someone who was told they did not belong. Rosa Parks was told she had no right to sit at the front of the bus. Nelson Mandela was told he had no right to stand against apartheid. Malala Yousafzai was told she had no right to speak of education for girls. And yet, each of them, like this woman, answered not with retreat, but with courage. You see, belonging is not something handed to you by the powerful. Belonging is claimed by those who believe in themselves enough to walk into rooms where the world says they shouldn't be. It is claimed by the student who raises their hand when everyone else stays silent. It is claimed by the worker who speaks truth in a meeting where others nod in fear. It is claimed by every single person who chooses to carry their worth like armor, refusing to let anyone diminish it. And so, when we return to that moment, when the billionaire family sneered, who invited her? We must recognize that the answer was bigger than one woman. It was an answer for everyone who has ever been doubted, overlooked, underestimated. She carried all of us into that room. She carried the voices of those who never got the chance to be at that table. She carried the dreams of those who were told no so many times that they stopped knocking. And in one act of defiance, she reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most courage. There are defining moments in life that reveal not only who we are, but also who others believe we are. These are the moments that test our dignity, our strength, and our belief in ourselves. One such moment came when a woman of vision, intelligence, and courage, walked into a room that was not built for her. It was a room decorated with wealth, dripping in privilege, filled with people who believed that power and status gave them the right to decide who belonged. She entered with grace, wearing her confidence like a crown, but before she could even sit, before her presence could even be acknowledged with respect, a question cut through the air like a blade. Who invited her? It was not simply a question of curiosity. It was a dismissal, a sneer, a public declaration that she was not welcome. Those words carried centuries of arrogance and entitlement. They carried the weight of generations who believed that wealth decides worth, that color dictates status, and that a seat at the table is reserved for the few, not the many. In that instant, every eye in the room turned toward her. Some eyes burned with disdain, others with curiosity, and still others with amusement, as though her very presence was a mistake, a disruption in the script of their carefully controlled world. But she did not flinch. She did not bow her head. She did not let the venom in those words seep into her spirit. Instead, she stood taller. This is where the true power of underestimation lies. Because when the world underestimates you, it gives you an opportunity to reveal strength that cannot be denied. Think about your own life. How many times have you entered a space where others doubted you? A classroom where no one thought you'd succeed. A workplace where your ideas were brushed aside. A gathering where your presence felt like an intrusion. We've all heard it in different forms. You don't belong here. You're not qualified enough. Who let you in? And yet, those moments, painful as they are, hold the seeds of transformation. For this woman, that sneer became a turning point. Because in that instant, she recognized something powerful. She did not need their validation. She did not need their approval. Her worth was not up for debate. The billionaire family believed their question stripped her of value. They thought it reminded her of her place. But in reality, it revealed theirs. Their sneer was not about her. It was about their fear. Fear of change, fear of losing control, fear of someone who did not look like them daring to stand equal, daring to challenge the unspoken rules of their kingdom. And that is the truth we must all remember. Underestimation is not a reflection of your weakness, it is a confession of their insecurity. When someone says, "Who invited you?" they are really saying, "You are a threat to the order we have created." Now picture her in that room. The chandeliers glistening, the suits crisp, the air thick with superiority. And there she was, a single woman, carrying the weight of generations who had been shut out, overlooked, dismissed. Her presence was not just about her. She represented every person who had ever been told they were not enough. Every person who had been excluded from the rooms where decisions were made. Every person who had been told to sit in the shadows while others enjoyed the light. That is why her response mattered. She did not shout. She did not argue. She did not lower herself to the level of their mockery. Instead, she carried herself with dignity. She let her silence speak louder than their sneers. And when the time came, she made a decision that would echo far beyond that single room, canceling their $5 billion deal. But let us be clear, this moment was never just about money. It was about principle. It was about showing the world that her identity, her dignity, her place in that room could not be bought or questioned. She understood something that too many forget: you do not need permission to belong where you have earned the right to stand. And so the story of "Who invited her?" becomes more than an insult. It becomes a rallying cry. A reminder that every sneer, every doubt, every dismissal you face is not a wall but a door. A door you must walk through with your head held high, proving not only to others, but to yourself that you deserve to be there. There is something extraordinary about the simple act of showing up. We often underestimate it, yet history has proven that presence alone can shift the course of events, challenge assumptions, and spark revolutions. The black woman who walked into that billionaire family's room embodied this truth. Her very presence was powerful. Not because she spoke first, not because she demanded attention, but because she dared to exist in a space where others thought she did not belong. Presence is not about being the loudest voice or the most decorated individual in the room. It is about carrying yourself with quiet strength, with dignity, with an unshakable belief that you deserve to stand where you are. That is what this woman carried into that space. And that is what unsettled those who sneered. Think about it. Those billionaires had wealth, they had status, they had everything money could buy, but what they lacked was the courage to welcome someone who challenged their sense of superiority. Her presence alone disrupted their certainty. She did not have to argue with them to disturb their comfort. She did not have to prove her intelligence in that moment to remind them that they were not the gatekeepers of worth. Simply by walking through the door, she revealed their weakness. And that is the hidden power of presence. It declares without words, "I am here. I matter. I will not be erased." Many of us have been taught to shrink when faced with resistance. We tell ourselves, maybe I don't belong here. Maybe they're right about me. But presence is the refusal to retreat. Presence is the courage to take up space even when others try to push you out. Think of the countless examples in history where presence changed everything. When Rosa Parks sat on that bus, her presence sparked a movement. When Malala raised her voice in a classroom where girls were told not to be, her presence challenged a system. When Nelson Mandela stood in a courtroom, falsely accused, his presence became a symbol of justice the world could not ignore. Presence is power. Not because it shouts, but because it refuses to vanish. And yet, presence requires strength. Walking into a room where you are not welcomed is not easy. Every sneer, every whisper, every sideways glance is designed to break you down. But here is where true courage shines. When you choose to stay, to sit, to stand tall, you are reminding not only them but yourself that your worth is not dependent on their acceptance. The woman who faced the sneer of "Who invited her?" knew this truth. She knew that if she left, if she allowed their dismissal to chase her out, she would be confirming their arrogance. Instead, she let her presence speak louder than their insult. She let the power of her being in that room weigh heavier than the billions of dollars on the table. Presence is not just for the famous or the powerful. It is for every person who has ever dared to step into spaces where they were told they did not belong. The student who raises their hand in a classroom where no one expects them to succeed. The immigrant who builds a life in a place that whispers they don't fit. The worker who sits in a meeting where their voice is dismissed but chooses to speak anyway. These acts of presence may seem small in the moment, but they ripple outward. They inspire others to stand, to show up, to believe that they too have the right to be seen. When one person refuses to disappear, they create a pathway for countless others to follow. That is why presence matters, because it is not just about you, it is about everyone who sees you, everyone who is reminded through your courage that they too can step forward. It is about shifting the atmosphere of a room, about breaking the silence that keeps people trapped in doubt. Presence is not only physical, it is spiritual, emotional, and psychological. It is the act of showing up with your whole self unapologetically and declaring that your story, your perspective, your identity deserves a place at the table. It is the refusal to erase your own existence, to make others comfortable. So when that woman stood in the billionaire family's room, facing sneers and questions, she was not just representing herself. She was carrying with her the weight of every person who had ever been excluded. She was saying with her presence what words could never fully capture: I belong here because I am here. Presence transforms fear into inspiration. Presence silences arrogance without uttering a single insult. Presence reminds the world that belonging is not something to be granted. It is something to be claimed. And once you claim it, once you refuse to let anyone push you out, you change not only the room you enter, but the future for everyone watching from the outside. In a world driven by wealth, it is easy to believe that money is the ultimate measure of power, that whoever holds the largest account holds the highest authority. That success is defined by numbers, by contracts, by deals inked on paper. But history, and this story in particular, reminds us of a truth far greater. Dignity is worth more than dollars. When that black woman faced the sneer of the billionaire family, she was not simply fighting for respect. She was defending the principle that her value could not be reduced to money. They thought they could dismiss her and still expect her to do business with them, still expect her to play by their rules, still expect her to bend to their arrogance. But she chose differently. She canceled a $5 billion deal. $5 billion, gone in a single decision. And here is the lesson she understood: that no sum of money is worth compromising your dignity. Because once you allow someone to put a price tag on your worth, you have surrendered the very thing that makes you unshakable. Think about it. How many people in history had the chance to make millions or billions, but chose instead to stand by principle? How many leaders walked away from riches so they could sleep with a clear conscience? How many heroes refused offers that promised them comfort, but would have cost them integrity? This woman knew what too many forget: money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy character. Money can build empires, but it cannot build respect. Money can open doors, but it cannot open hearts. Dignity, on the other hand, creates legacies that endure long after wealth is gone. We live in a culture where compromise often hides in the language of opportunity. You will hear it: "It's just business." Don't take it personally. Think of the prophets. But there comes a moment in every person's life when you must decide what matters most. Do you want to be remembered for the wealth you accumulated, or the principles you refused to betray? Dignity over dollars is not just about rejecting disrespect, it is about understanding the power of saying no. Saying no to the deal that forces you to betray yourself. Saying no to the partnership that demands you silence your truth. Saying no to the opportunities that promise the world but strip you of your soul. This woman's decision to walk away from billions shook the family not because they lost money, but because they lost control. They were used to people sacrificing their self-worth for the illusion of success. They were used to their wealth being the final word. But she reminded them that true power belongs to the one who refuses to be bought. And isn't that the test we all face? At work, when we are tempted to compromise our values for a promotion. In relationships, when we are pressured to silence our needs for acceptance. In society, when we are told to play small so others can feel big. These are not small moments. They are the crossroads where we must choose dignity or dollars. Remember this: the respect you command is directly tied to the standards you refuse to lower. The world may offer you wealth, applause, and opportunities. But if they come at the cost of your dignity, they are nothing more than chains wrapped in gold. There are people who will try to measure your worth by what you own. But the truth is, your worth is revealed by what you will not sell. It is revealed by the moments when you draw a line and say, This is not up for negotiation. And here's the powerful part. When you choose dignity over dollars, you do not lose, you elevate. You elevate yourself above the fleeting, shallow rewards of arrogance and greed. You elevate your legacy into something that inspires others to stand taller. You elevate your voice into a symbol of strength that cannot be ignored. That is why this woman's act was so profound. She didn't just cancel a deal, she declared the truth: my dignity is not for sale. And in doing so, she became an example for everyone watching, a reminder that the greatest fortune we will ever hold is the integrity we refuse to compromise. Every insult carries a choice. The choice to absorb it, to let it pierce you, to let it linger in your heart until it begins to shape how you see yourself. Or the choice to take that insult, flip it, and turn it into fuel. Fuel for your growth, your determination, your rise. When the billionaire family sneered, who invited her? They thought they were reducing the black woman to shame, to silence, to smallness. They thought their insult would be the chain that kept her in her place. But instead, she chose to turn that insult into power. She chose not to let their words become a wound, but a weapon. Not against them, but against the limits they tried to impose on her. That is the essence of resilience. It is not about avoiding insults, it is about learning how to transmute them. Like coal under pressure becomes a diamond, like fire-shaped steel, insults can be transformed into strength if you refuse to let them break you. Think about the great stories of progress. Almost every leader, every dreamer, every visionary we admire was once insulted, mocked, dismissed. Thomas Edison was told he was too stupid to learn anything, and he went on to light the world. Oprah Winfrey was called unfit for television, and she became one of the most influential media voices in history. Serena Williams was mocked for her appearance, her style, her strength, and she became one of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen. Insults are often delivered with the intention to destroy, but their power depends not on the words themselves, but on how we choose to receive them. If you let an insult burrow deep, it will poison your spirit. But if you take that insult, hold it up to the light, and say, "Thank you for reminding me what I must overcome," it becomes a stepping stone instead of a stumbling block. This woman understood that truth. She knew the insult was never really about her. It was about them. It was about their insecurity, their arrogance, their fear of change. Their sneer said less about her presence and more about their discomfort with someone who did not fit their mold standing as their equal. By recognizing this, she stripped the insult of its power and reclaimed it as her own. Here's what insults reveal: they are often an unintended confirmation of your potential. People rarely insult those they do not feel threatened by. The billionaire family did not sneer because she was weak. They sneered because her presence was strong enough to unsettle their certainty. They sneered because her being there challenged the world they had built. They sneered because they knew, deep down, that she carried a power they could not control. And this is where we must learn from her example. The next time someone underestimates you, the next time someone calls you out, mocks you, belittles you, pause and ask yourself, what does this reveal about their fear? What does this confirm about my strength? Because in many ways, the insult is proof that you are shaking something inside of them. Turning insults into power requires discipline. It requires the refusal to engage in petty battles. She could have shouted back. She could have argued. She could have let anger lead her. But she chose composure. She chose dignity. She chose to let her actions, not her words, be her response. And in the end, her decision to cancel their $5 billion deal spoke louder than any insult they could have hurled. This is what true power looks like. It is not in the clapback, not in the immediate reaction, not in the attempt to hurt back harder. True power is in the ability to rise above, to stand firm, to let the insult fuel your determination rather than derail your focus. The greatest revenge against disrespect is not retaliation. It is transformation. It is becoming so undeniably strong, so undeniably excellent that the insult fades into irrelevance, overshadowed by the brightness of your achievement. So, let the insults come. Let the sneers echo. Let the dismissive words fall. Because each one is an opportunity to show resilience, to claim strength, to demonstrate that no insult, no sneer, no dismissal can define who you are. The power lies not in their words, but in your response. And when you choose to rise, when you choose to turn their insult into the fuel for your greatness, You rob them of the very weapon they tried to use against you. When the billionaire family sneered, who invited her? The insult may have seemed like it was aimed at her, but in truth, it reflected something far deeper. Insults, dismissals, and underestimations are rarely about the target. They are about the speaker. They are mirrors that reveal the insecurity, the fear, the fragility of those who use them. Arrogance often disguises weakness. People who feel the need to belittle others are usually defending something within themselves, an inadequacy, a fear, a doubt they cannot face. And so, instead of confronting their own weakness, they try to project it outward, to place the burden on someone else. This is what was happening in that grand room of wealth and privilege. The family, despite their billions, felt the quiet tremor of insecurity when that woman walked in. They had built their identity on exclusivity, on the illusion that power was theirs alone, that certain people belonged while others did not. But her presence cracked that illusion. Her calm, her confidence, her audacity to walk through that door reminded them of something they had spent years avoiding, that money cannot buy greatness, and that privilege cannot erase truth. Their sneer was not an expression of strength, it was a confession of fear, and this is what we must learn to recognize in our own lives. When someone dismisses you, mocks you, or tries to undermine your value, pause for a moment and ask ye, what does this reveal about them, not me? More often than not, their insult is less a judgment of your worth and more a reflection of the weakness they are trying to hide. Think of the school bully who picks on the quiet child. The bully's aggression is not born from real strength, but from insecurity. Fear of not being enough, fear of being overlooked, fear of being powerless. Think of the colleague who undermines your ideas in meetings. Their dismissal is not proof that your idea lacks value, it is proof that your idea threatens their comfort. Think of the critics who laugh at dreamers, inventors, artists. Their laughter is not the sound of wisdom, but the noise of fear. Fear that someone else dares to achieve what they never had the courage to pursue. This is why it is so dangerous to internalize the judgments of others. If you let their insults define you, you are allowing their insecurity to become your identity. You are carrying a burden that was never yours to hold. The billionaire family's sneer had nothing to do with the woman's worth. It had everything to do with their fear of losing control, their fear of change, their fear of confronting a truth they could not buy their way out of. The mirror of insecurity does not only exist in grand boardrooms. It exists in everyday life. In the parent who discourages their child from dreaming too big because they themselves never had the courage to chase their own dreams. In the friend who downplays your success because it makes them feel small in comparison. In the stranger who mocks you on the street or online because your light exposes the shadows they live in. When you see this clearly, when you recognize that insults are often confessions, everything changes. Instead of shrinking under criticism, you begin to stand taller. Instead of questioning your worth, you begin to question their fear. Instead of absorbing their poison, you begin to see it for what it truly is, a projection of their insecurity. And here lies a powerful shift. Once you see insults not as truth but as mirrors, you free yourself from their grip. You no longer waste energy proving yourself to people who are not really attacking you, but only defending themselves. You no longer bend to fit their narrative because you understand that their narrative was never about you in the first place. This woman knew that truth in the room that day. She did not need to defend herself against their sneer. She did not need to shout, to argue, to prove, because she understood the insult said nothing about her and everything about them. By standing tall, by refusing to break, she forced them to see their own reflection. Their own insecurity staring back at them in the form of her unshaken dignity. The sneer, who invited her, was not a weapon against her. It was a mirror that revealed their weakness. And instead of picking up that mirror and turning it inward, they tried to shatter it by dismissing her. But mirrors, once broken, leave shards that cut the very hands that tried to smash them. This is the irony of insecurity. In attempting to diminish others, the insecure only expose their own fragility. They may raise their voices, they may laugh, they may sneer, but beneath it all is the quiet tremor of fear. And when you recognize that, when you choose not to carry their fear as your own, You begin to step into a freedom that no insult can ever take away. We often imagine courage as something reserved for heroes, for leaders, for those whose names are etched into history books. We picture grand speeches, massive crowds, battles fought on the world's stage. But the truth is, courage most often begins in ordinary places, carried out by ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. The black woman who walked into that billionaire family's room was not born into their wealth. She did not inherit their privilege. What she carried was not billions of dollars, but something far rarer. Courage. The courage to show up where she was not expected, to endure the sneers and whispers, and to stand tall when every force in the room tried to shrink her. That courage was not born in luxury, it was built in silence, in struggle, in the moments no one else saw. Ordinary people, when armed with extraordinary courage, change the world. Think of the mother who works 3 jobs but still finds time to inspire her children to dream beyond their circumstances. Think of the teacher in a forgotten classroom who refuses to let her students believe they are forgotten too. Think of the young activist who raises their voice in a society that tells them to be quiet. None of these people begin with fame or fortune. They begin with a choice, the choice to act with courage when it would be easier to stay silent. And isn't that the essence of transformation? That the greatest revolutions are rarely sparked by the privileged, but by those who refuse to let their lack of privilege define their limits. Rosa Parks was an ordinary seamstress who simply decided she had been silent long enough. Malala was just a girl with a notebook and a dream of going to school. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer with no army, yet his courage brought an empire to its knees. These were ordinary people, but their courage was extraordinary. This woman's story belongs to that same tradition. She walked into that room of billionaires not because she was wealthy, but because she was worthy. Her courage was her currency, and it carried more weight than all the money piled on their side of the table. By canceling their $5 billion deal, she reminded the world that the true measure of strength is not how much you own, but how much you are willing to sacrifice for your dignity. But here is the deeper truth. Courage is not only about standing against injustice on a global stage. Courage is also about the small, quiet choices you make every day. It is about speaking up when you see someone being mistreated. It is about pursuing a dream that others laugh at. It is about refusing to live a smaller life just because someone else is uncomfortable with your greatness. Courage is walking into the classroom even when you are the only one who looks like you. Courage is raising your hand in the meeting when you know your idea might be dismissed. Courage is daring to believe in yourself when no one else does. These moments may not make headlines, but they are no less extraordinary. They are the foundation upon which real change is built. Ordinary people with extraordinary courage are the heartbeat of progress. They remind us that courage does not belong to the powerful, it belongs to the willing. It belongs to discomfort. They are willing to endure discomfort. They are willing to risk rejection. They are willing to stand for something greater than themselves. And courage is contagious. When one person chooses to stand tall, it gives others permission to do the same. When one worker speaks truth to power, it inspires colleagues to raise their voices. When one student refuses to give up, it encourages others to keep trying. That is the ripple effect of courage. What begins in one ordinary life can echo across nations, across generations. This woman, standing firm in the face of the sneer, may not have known who was watching her that day. But somewhere, someone saw her decision and realized they too could choose dignity over fear. Somewhere, someone heard her story and found the courage to walk into their own room, to face their own sneer, to make their own stand. And that is the beauty of courage. It multiplies, it spreads, it transforms. One act becomes many, one voice becomes a chorus, one choice becomes a movement. The woman who canceled the $5 billion deal was not just protecting herself, she was empowering others. She was showing every ordinary person that courage does not require billions. It requires belief. It requires resilience. It requires the willingness to stand, even when standing comes at a cost. And so we must look at our own lives, at the places where courage is demanded of us. For most of us, it will not be in a room of billionaires with billions at stake. It will be in the daily grind of life, in the small choices that test our values, in the moments when we must decide between silence and truth, between comfort and courage. And if ordinary people with extraordinary courage can shape history, then surely we too can shape the rooms we walk into, the communities we live in, the futures we dream of. Courage is one of the most celebrated virtues in history, but what we often forget is that courage is not free. It comes with a cost, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, but always present. The woman who stood in that billionaire's boardroom and canceled a $5 billion deal knew this cost. She knew that her refusal to accept disrespect would not just walk away from money, but from power, influence, and opportunities that others would spend their lives chasing. Yet she also knew something more profound, that dignity without price is worth more than all the wealth in the world. This is the paradox of courage. It elevates you, but it also isolates you. It strengthens you, but it tests you. It earns you admiration, but it also attracts resentment. To walk with courage is to walk with sacrifice. And too often, we romanticize courage without acknowledging the toll it takes. We love the stories of heroes standing tall, but we forget the nights they spent doubting themselves, the friendships they lost, the comfort they gave up, the battles they fought not in public, but in silence, alone. The woman who stood against arrogance did not simply make a single bold decision in the moment. She carried the weight of every decision that led her there. She carried the memory of the doors once closed in her face, the voices that told her she did not belong, the fatigue of constantly proving herself in spaces that demanded proof again and again. Every act of courage rests upon countless unseen battles. Every bold step is preceded by years of smaller steps, of sacrifices no one applauded. Courage often costs relationships. Some will not understand why you refuse to bend, why you insist on holding your ground. Some will call you stubborn, unwise, even reckless. They will measure your choices by what you lost, never by what you preserved. And so, courage can feel lonely, like you are standing on an island, while others sail away to safer shores. But this loneliness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are willing to carry a burden most people will never dare to touch. Courage also costs comfort. It pushes you into places that are uncertain, into rooms where you are the outsider, into decisions that might leave you with less security than you once had. But here is the truth. Comfort has never built greatness. Comfort has never rewritten a story. Comfort has never dismantled injustice. It is only when we are willing to leave behind the ease of silence that we begin to carve paths toward something greater. And courage costs time. Every courageous decision delays the path of least resistance. When you choose to stand against disrespect, you may lose the shortcut to wealth, to recognition, to advancement. But what you gain is a foundation that no one can ever take from you. The woman who turned down $5 billion may have lost financial gain, but she gained something far richer, a legacy of unshakable integrity, an inheritance of strength for every person who comes after her. Think of the great figures of history. Every one of them paid the cost of courage. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. Martin Luther King Jr. faced constant threats and ultimately gave his life. Harriet Tubman risked everything, again and again, for the freedom of others. These were not abstract costs, they were real, painful sacrifices. Yet without them, history would look very different today. And that is the lesson. The cost of courage is high, but the cost of cowardice is higher. But courage does not belong only to the great, it belongs to the ordinary. The factory worker who speaks out against unfair treatment risks losing his job. The young student who challenges injustice risks being ostracized. The single parent who pursues education while raising children risks exhaustion, failure, even ridicule. These costs are real, but so are the rewards: self-respect, progress, a future that does not repeat the past. The cost of courage is also emotional. It means carrying the weight of other people's doubt. It means battling your own fear at every step. It means waking up and facing the voices that say you are not enough. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to move forward despite it. And every day you choose to do so, you are paying into something greater than money. You are paying into the currency of change. So yes, courage demands something from you. It will take your comfort, your security, sometimes your acceptance in the eyes of others, but it will give you something far greater in return. It will give you the knowledge that you stood firm when others bent. It will give you the power to inspire those who thought they could not. It will give you a strength that no one can strip away because it was forged not in wealth, not in privilege, But in sacrifice, stories are powerful. They shape the way we see ourselves, the way others see us, and the way the world defines who belongs and who does not. For centuries, narratives have been written to exclude, to diminish, to confine. They tell us who is worthy and who is not, who is powerful and who is weak, who gets a seat at the table and who remains outside the door. But what happens when someone refuses to accept that story? What happens when a person looks at the script handed to them and decides to write their own? That is when history changes. The woman who was sneered at in that room knew the script that was written for her. She was not supposed to be there. The sneer, the mocking words, who invited her, were not just about her presence, they were about the narrative they believed. The narrative that wealth equals superiority. The narrative that race or gender defines worth. The narrative that some belong by birthright, while others must beg for permission. But at that moment, she refused to play her assigned role. She tore up the script and began to write a new one where her dignity mattered more than their approval, one where her power came not from their acceptance, but from her own unshakable resolve. Rewriting the narrative is not easy. The old stories are comfortable. They are repeated again and again, reinforced in boardrooms, in media, in classrooms, in conversations. They become so familiar that even those excluded sometimes begin to believe them. That is the real danger. Not just being underestimated by others, but underestimating yourself because you've accepted their version of the story. That is why rewriting the narrative begins first in the mind. It begins with rejecting the lie that you are less, that you must shrink, that your worth is conditional. It begins with saying, I am here because I deserve to be, and no one's sneer can erase that truth. Consider history's greatest breakthroughs. Every one of them began with someone rewriting the narrative. The Wright brothers rejected the story that humans could not fly. Rosa Parks rejected the story that a black woman's place was at the back of the bus. Malala Yousafzai rejected the story that girls should not be educated. These were not just acts of defiance, they were acts of authorship. They rewrote the story of what was possible, and in doing so, they changed the future for everyone. When the woman walked away from that $5 billion deal, she was not just making a business decision. She was rewriting the narrative of power itself. She was declaring that power is not measured in the wealth of those who sneer, but in the courage of those who will not bow. She was showing the world that to decline disrespect is to affirm your own story, one where you are the protagonist, not the supporting role in someone else's play. But rewriting the narrative is not only for the famous, the wealthy, or the bold. It belongs to you, to me, to every ordinary person who faces a moment of choice. You may be told you are too young, too old, too poor, too unqualified. That is the story others want you to believe. But you have the pen in your hand. You can decide that your background does not determine your destiny. You can decide that your mistakes are not the final chapter, but only the opening pages of redemption. You can decide that every limitation placed upon you is not a wall, but a challenge to climb higher. Rewriting the narrative also means refusing to inherit the labels passed down from generation to generation. Maybe your family was told they would never rise. Maybe your community was told it would never matter. Maybe you were told you would never succeed. These are stories written by those who profit from your silence. To rewrite the narrative is to say, I carry a different story forward. I carry a story of strength, of possibility, of dignity that cannot be bought or diminished. And let us not forget, when one person rewrites the narrative, it ripples outward. Courage is contagious. When Rosa Parks sat down, she gave countless others the courage to stand up. When one woman cancels a deal because she refuses to accept disrespect, she sends a message to millions that dignity is more valuable than dollars. She reminds us that the narrative is not fixed, not permanent, not unchangeable. It is clay, and those with courage shape it anew. The world will always try to tell you its version of your story. It will try to hand you scripts that say you are small, insignificant, powerless. But the truth is, the story is yours to tell. The pen is in your hand. And every decision, every act of courage, every refusal to bend to disrespect is another line you write in a narrative that belongs to you and to no one else. For too long, the world has taught us to believe that power is about wealth, titles, and control. It is measured in skyscrapers with your name etched into the glass, in bank accounts so large they look infinite, in seats at the highest tables of politics and industry. But what if I told you that is only an illusion? What if I told you the truest form of power is something no currency can buy, no corporation can grant, and no empire can guarantee? Because power, real power, is not found in the billions of dollars on a balance sheet. It is found in the strength of spirit that refuses to be broken. Think of that woman who walked into the billionaire family's home, carrying not the security of their approval but the dignity of her presence. She was not welcomed, she was mocked. She was not celebrated, she was dismissed. And yet, in that moment, the scales of power began to shift, because while they held billions, she held something they could not touch: self-respect, courage, and a truth that rang louder than their sneer. That is what power looks like when it is redefined. Power is not control over others, it is control over yourself. It is the ability to remain calm when provoked, to remain dignified when insulted, to remain steadfast when pressured. Power is not about how many people bow to you, but about how firmly you stand when no one stands with you. When she refused their disrespect and canceled their deal, she reminded the world that money without morality is weakness disguised as strength. She reminded us that true power is not submission to insult for the sake of gain. It is the refusal to sell your soul at any price. And this redefinition of power is not just for boardrooms or billion-dollar contracts. It belongs to every single one of us. Power is the parent who works 2 jobs to feed their children and refuses to let poverty define their worth. Power is the student who studies under dim light, fighting against all odds to pursue education, rewriting the destiny handed down to them. Power is the worker who, when shouted at, holds their head high and answers with quiet dignity instead of rage, knowing that respect for self is worth more than the approval of those who demean them. History has always been written by those who understood this truth. Gandhi had no armies, no billions, no throne, and yet he commanded a movement that shook an empire. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years behind bars, stripped of freedom, wealth, and worldly influence, and yet when he walked out of prison, the world recognized him as one of the most powerful leaders of our age. Power redefined is not the domination of others, it is the liberation of oneself. The danger comes when we chase the false version of power. When we believe that our value is only measured by how much money we make, how many people recognize our name, or how many doors we can force open. That kind of power is fragile. It crumbles when respect is lost, when integrity is compromised, when the people you step on refuse to forget. But the power of dignity, of courage, of self-respect, this power endures. It outlives titles, it outlasts wealth, it survives even when history tries to erase it. Ask yourself, what does it mean to be powerful? Is it to silence others or to lift them? Is it to accumulate riches or to accumulate respect? Is it to control the world around you or to master the storms within you? Because the woman who canceled that deal could have walked away with billions added to her legacy, but she chose instead to walk away with her soul intact. And in that choice, she demonstrated more power than those who sneered at her could ever claim. And so we must all begin to redefine power in our own lives. It is not about titles or riches. It is about the courage to speak truth when silence is safer. It is about the strength to endure when others dismiss you. It is about the faith to believe in your worth even when the world tells you otherwise. Real power does not come from the outside. It rises from within, untouchable, unshakable, undeniable. It is the quiet storm in the human spirit that no sneer, no insult, no act of exclusion can extinguish. When the billionaire family sneered, who invited her? They revealed something deeper than arrogance. They revealed a wound that still runs through our societies, the wound of exclusion. The belief that some belong in the room and others do not. The illusion that power, wealth, or background grants someone the right to decide who is worthy and who is not. But history has always corrected this illusion, and the woman who stood in that room, unshaken by their disdain, became part of that correction. She showed us that the path from exclusion to inclusion is paved not with permission, but with courage. Inclusion is not simply about being present in a room. It is about being valued in that room. And that day, they tried to make her presence small, insignificant, unworthy of recognition. But by refusing to tolerate their disrespect, she redefined the meaning of presence. She was not just there, she claimed her space with dignity. She proved that inclusion cannot be granted by those who look down on others. It must be demanded and embodied by those who know their worth. This story is not only about her, it is about us. How many times have ordinary people been excluded, ignored, dismissed? How many workers have had their ideas stolen because someone assumed their voice carried no weight? How many women have been silenced in rooms where decisions about their futures were made without them? How many people of color, immigrants, or marginalized communities have been told through subtle glances or sharp words, "This space is not for you"? Exclusion is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, and breaking that pattern requires strength that refuses to bow to disrespect. But here is the lesson: every act of exclusion carries within it the possibility of transformation. The moment someone is excluded and chooses to respond not with shame, but with strength, the narrative begins to shift. The black woman did not storm out in anger, nor did she shrink in silence. Instead, she stood her ground and chose to cancel the very deal that was meant to exclude her. In doing so, she turned exclusion into a lesson, not just for them, but for the world watching. Inclusion, when properly understood, is not charity. It is not a favor done by the powerful to the powerless. It is recognition that every voice carries value, that every perspective adds strength, that every human being has the right to dignity. The woman's act of courage forces us to confront this truth: you cannot build a lasting empire on exclusion. Because exclusion weakens, but inclusion strengthens. Exclusion divides, but inclusion unites. Exclusion diminishes potential, but inclusion unlocks it. Look at the greatest achievements of humanity, whether it was putting a man on the moon, curing diseases, or building bridges across continents. None of it was done by exclusion. It was done by collaboration, by the gathering of diverse minds, by inclusion of talents from every corner of the earth. When we exclude, we shrink the possibilities of what can be achieved. But when we include, we multiply the potential of what can be imagined. The woman's story is a modern parable, a reminder that inclusion is not passive. It is active. It requires courage from those who are excluded and humility from those who hold power. And when courage meets humility, when dignity meets respect, when presence is honored instead of mocked, true inclusion is born. But here's the challenge: too often we wait for others to create inclusion for us. Too often we believe it is the responsibility of leaders, institutions, or the wealthy to invite us into the room. Yet the truth is, sometimes you must walk into the room uninvited and remind the world that your value does not need their approval. Sometimes you must cancel the deal, step away from the table, and declare with your actions, "If you cannot respect me, you cannot work with me." Exclusion thrives on silence, but inclusion is born in defiance. And every time someone like her refuses to be diminished, the path widens for countless others who will come after. Every act of defiance becomes a seed of inclusion for the future. Every stand for dignity becomes a bridge for the next generation. And so the call to us is clear: we must not only demand inclusion for ourselves, but also extend it to others. We must be the people who open doors instead of closing them, who lift voices instead of silencing them, who create tables wide enough for every seat to be filled with respect. Because the measure of true strength is not how many people you keep out. It is how many you empower to come in. Belonging has never been about permission. It has never been about someone at the head of the table pointing to a chair and saying, "Now you may sit." Belonging is about the inner declaration that says, "I am worthy of this space, and I will not shrink to fit your expectations." When the woman stood in that room, confronted by their sneer, she understood something that many of us spend our whole lives learning: that belonging is not granted by gatekeepers. It is claimed by those who believe they deserve to be there. Too many people live their lives waiting for approval, waiting for someone else to validate their worth, waiting for a nod from authority, a pat on the back, an invitation from the powerful. But if history teaches us anything, it is that those who wait for permission to belong rarely find it. From the civil rights leaders who marched across bridges, to the women who demanded the right to vote, to the workers who built unions from the ground up, belonging was never handed down like a gift. It was claimed, often in the face of resistance, and sometimes at great personal cost. The woman in that story did not wait for them to welcome her. She did not hope that their sneer would soften or that their words would change. She stood tall because she knew something unshakable. Her presence was not an accident. Her worth was not up for debate. She was not an intruder in that room. She was a force that room needed, whether they recognized it or not. And that is what courage looks like. It is not the absence of fear, nor the absence of hostility. It is the determination to stand where you know you belong, even when others try to push you away. This is the lesson for all of us. Belonging begins as an internal act of courage. It begins with the quiet conviction that you are enough, even when the world tells you otherwise. It begins with the refusal to let sneers, insults, or prejudice convince you that your worth is negotiable. And once you claim that sense of belonging within yourself, no one can take it away. But courage is tested in moments of rejection. It is easy to feel like you belong when everyone celebrates your presence, when the doors swing wide open, when the applause is loud. But it is in the silence, in the sneers, in the moments of exclusion where courage is truly measured. That is when you must decide whether to shrink or to stand. Whether to bow your head or lift it higher. Whether to walk out in shame or to remain in dignity. And the choice you make in those moments does not just shape your own life. It shapes the future for those who will walk the same path behind you. Think of the people who have walked before us. Those who sat at lunch counters where they were not welcome. Those who spoke up in boardrooms where their voices were ignored. Those who stepped onto stages where they were told they had no right to stand. Each of them made the same choice to belong, even when others denied it. And because they had the courage to belong, we stand in a world that is freer, fairer, and fuller of possibility. But we cannot stop here. Courage to belong is not just about standing up for yourself. It is about extending belonging to others. If you know what it feels like to be sneered at, excluded, dismissed, then you also know the power of being welcomed, honored, and respected. And so the courage to belong is also the courage to make space for others, to open the door a little wider, to say to the next person, "You too have a place here." In that billionaire family's room, belonging was treated like a privilege they could withhold. But the woman's decision shattered that illusion. She showed that belonging is not theirs to give or take. It comes from within, from dignity, from the courage to say, "I deserve to be here as much as anyone else." That kind of courage changes the dynamic in every room, in every company, in every community. Because when one person stands with the courage to belong, they awaken the same courage in countless others who have been waiting to see what's possible. Belonging is the opposite of fear. Fear shrinks, but belonging expands. Fear isolates, but belonging unites. Fear says, "You don't deserve this place," but the belonging replies, "This place is mine too." And when enough people find the courage to belong, entire systems begin to change. Rooms once closed begin to open. Tables once reserved for the few begin to expand. Narratives once dominated by exclusion begin to be rewritten with inclusion. There comes a moment in every generation where silence is no longer an option, where complacency becomes complicity, where looking down at the floor instead of lifting your head means surrendering your dignity to those who would take it from you. That moment is not only for leaders, not only for the powerful, not only for the wealthy. That moment belongs to each of us. It is the moment when life calls us to rise. The black woman who canceled the $5 billion deal faced her moment. She was sneered at, disrespected, diminished by words meant to wound. But instead of folding, instead of accepting their distorted version of who she was, she rose. And when she rose, she carried with her more than her own self-respect. She carried the weight of a truth that echoes through history. When you stand tall in the face of insult, you rise not only for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been silenced, doubted, or told they did not belong. The call to rise does not come in grand speeches or ceremonies. It comes in the quiet corners of life. It comes when you are told you are not qualified, when your worth is questioned, when your dreams are dismissed. It comes when the doors close in your face and you have a choice: to walk away defeated or to knock again, louder, stronger, with unshakable belief in your own value. Rising begins not in the applause of others, but in the conviction you carry within yourself. We must remember that ordinary people have risen in extraordinary times. A teacher who stands up for a child who others have ignored. A worker who demands fair wages in the face of threats. A mother who sacrifices everything so her children may dream bigger than she ever could. These stories are not written in history books, but they are written in the fabric of progress. They are reminders that rising is not reserved for the few, it is a responsibility of the many. The call to rise is a challenge. It will not come when it is convenient. It will come when it is hardest. When the world whispers to you, stay small. When voices around you say, you don't belong here. When the risk feels too heavy and the cost feels too high. And yet, it is in those moments that rising matters most. Because comfort never changes the world. It is courage, in the face of discomfort, that shifts the course of history. Think of the power that is unleashed when one person answers the call to rise. Rosa Parks, weary from a long day of work, chose to remain seated, and in that act, she rose for generations. Nelson Mandela, after decades of imprisonment, walked out of his cell with dignity, and in that walk, he rose for a nation. Malala Yousafzai, silenced by violence, lifted her voice again, and in that voice, she rose for millions of girls denied education. These are not superhuman figures. They are human beings who, like all of us, were confronted with a choice. And their choice was to rise. But let us not only look at history, let us look at ourselves. Where in your life are you being called to rise? Is it in your workplace, where you feel unseen or undervalued? Is it in your family, where cycles of silence and hurt need to be broken? Is it in your community, where injustice demands a voice? The call is not distant, not abstract. It is personal. And when you rise, you are not only changing your life, you are becoming a living example that others can draw strength from. This is the legacy of that woman in the boardroom. She could have stayed silent, swallowed the insult, signed the contract, and accepted the billions. But she knew that rising meant more than money. Rising meant showing that dignity cannot be bought, that self-worth cannot be negotiated, that one act of defiance can echo louder than $5 billion. Her rise was not just for her. It was for every person who had ever been sneered at, excluded, or diminished. Rising is not about arrogance. It is not about pride without purpose. Rising is about standing in truth, in dignity, in humanity. It is about looking at those who doubt you and saying, you may not see my worth, but I do. And I will live by it. Rising is about refusing to live in the shadows of fear and choosing instead to walk into the light of possibility. The call to rise is before us now, and it asks of each of us, will you stay seated in silence? Or will you rise and claim the space that has always been yours, my friends? What began with a sneer? Who invited her? Ended with an act of defiance that shook the foundations of wealth and arrogance. But this story was never just about a $5 billion deal. It was about something far greater. It was about the human spirit refusing to be bought, silenced, or diminished. It was about the courage to rise when the world tries to keep you down. Every keynote we have walked through today is a reminder that power does not belong to those who insult, exclude, or belittle. Real power belongs to those who dare to stand tall with dignity. To those who turn wounds into wisdom, sneers into strength, exclusion into empowerment. And so I say this to you, you do not need billions of dollars to be powerful. You do not need the approval of the so-called gatekeepers to belong. What you need is the courage to believe in yourself, the strength to carry your dignity into every room you enter, and the determination to never let anyone else define your worth. Look around you. This is not just your story. It is ours. Together, we are rewriting the narrative. Together, we are proving that no insult, no prejudice, no barrier can stand against people who refuse to be broken. Together, we are rising, not for wealth, not for status, but for justice, for respect, for the dignity that belongs to every human soul. So let this moment be your reminder. No matter where you stand in life, no matter the battles you face, you have within you the same strength that has carried generations through fire and into freedom. You have within you the same courage that cancels billion-dollar deals when dignity is at stake. You have within you the same power to rise. Rise in your workplace. Rise in your family. Rise in your community. Rise in your own heart. Rise not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Rise not because the world gives you permission, but because it cannot stop you once you do. Rise not for yourself alone, but for all those who will see you and find the courage to rise too. And when history asks what we did in the face of sneers, doubts, and walls built to exclude us, let it be said that we rose, that we stood, that we believed, that we built a future not on fear, but on dignity, on unity, on hope. The call to rise is now. The choice is yours, and the future. Our future begins with what you choose to do today.